Hello and welcome to the PJ Pod, brought to you by the Pharmaceutical Journal, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society's official journal. This episode is a research spotlight, where we'll highlight an interesting paper from one of our sister journals, talk through the findings of the work and take a look where it sits in the wider context. This episode is on deprescribing.
Deprescribing has become quite fashionable, quite trendy in the research space over the last 20 years and more recently in the policy and practice space as well.
This is Sean Scott, lecturer in behavioural medicine at the University of Leicester and recent guest editor for a themed collection on deprescribing for the International Journal of Pharmacy Practice, who focus on high-quality peer-reviewed content in health services research, specifically relating to aspects of the medication use process.
Deprescribing was first coined 20 years ago in an article by Michael C. Woodward, so it's quite nice on Deprescribing's 20th anniversary that we've now got the launch of this themed collection.
Wonderful timing, I'm sure you'll agree. Also in this episode, you'll hear from the author of one of the papers in this Deprescribing collection, Hamde Nazar. But let's start with Sean.
So ever since medicines have been prescribed, there's been an expectation that they are regularly reviewed, and if they become inappropriate, either because they're not benefiting the patient anymore, or because actually they're more likely to cause harm than the benefit that they offer, then medicine should be stopped.
As you've heard, deprescribing isn't a new concept. The terms existed for 2 decades. But we're now reaching a point where the amount of literature on the topic is substantial.
That body of literature has really exploded over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and it's accelerating at a real pace. And we've reached this point now where we think, actually, there's a lot out there, lots of people doing different things, and it would be great to have all of that kind of cherry-picked and put into one place, into one repository, where we can continue to add to that over time as well. So what's nice about this themed collection is it will be a live themed collection. It will continue to be added to over time.
A live themed collection is a nice way to track the evolution of a particular field. I asked Sean how research into deprescribing has developed over the years.
So from a research perspective, historically research has focused on trying to understand what's happening in practice at the moment. So in the absence of any intervention, just how much deprescribing are people doing at the moment? And I think unsurprisingly, we find that there's very little deprescribing happening, particularly what we call proactive deprescribing, so stopping medicines before they cause a problem, rather than reactive deprescribing, which is stopping medicines after they've caused a problem. We're quite good at that in practice, but not particularly effective at proactive deprescribing. So that's where the evidence base kind of started and where it's been historically. What we've seen more of over the last 5 years is research and policy pivoting towards, right, we know this is a problem, what are the solutions?
And it's that more recent flavour of deprescribing research that we wanted to shine a spotlight on today. Hamde Nazar is a senior lecturer at the School of Pharmacy at Newcastle University, and she recently published a paper aiming to understand the enablers and barriers of deprescribing inappropriate analgesia in community pharmacy. Hamde and her team utilised a behavioural change model to identify problems and potential interventions in this scenario. I'll let Hamde explain more.
So it was basically a qualitative piece of work. We wanted to speak to community pharmacists out in practice to really understand their experiences and perceptions with regards to this problem. So we looked to recruit initially community pharmacists in the region, so that's in the northeast, and that was taking a convenience sampling approach. And when we had returned consent forms sent through, we then were able to contact those pharmacists, undertake an interview either face-to-face on the telephone or using Zoom or Teams. Those interviews were transcribed verbatim, and then we used a approach called framework analysis to analyse those transcripts, and then we used the behavioural models to give a lens when we were analysing the data to understand what the barriers and facilitators were related to the behaviours and map those to the components of the behavioural model. And the next step was then to understand if we could look at those barriers and facilitators, and using a behaviour change taxonomy, we were able to identify if there were particular interventions that could be used within a design of a strategy to help pharmacists, community pharmacists particularly, become more involved in the identification and tackling inappropriate medication use in the pharmacy.
The interviews demonstrated that community pharmacists were generally positive about being involved in identifying and addressing inappropriate analgesia, and saw it as being aligned to their clinical role. They also expressed that they had the correct clinical training and the pharmacological knowledge. However, the participants did think there were some barriers.
Potentially they lacked the skills and confidence in the sense of having those conversations with patients in that setting. They also spoke about how community pharmacy services generally are funded in the pharmacy, and the way the model currently works is that it doesn't necessarily incentivize deprescribing of these medicines in pharmacy. So one of the suggestions was looking more broadly about how clinical services are funded through community pharmacy. Pharmacists also spoke about the opportunity to see a patient's care record to identify if a medication was actually being misused or inappropriately being prescribed. If a pharmacist wasn't able to see that patient's record and see that history of when that medication might have been prescribed and when it may have been used, then they can't really build a picture around if that medication is indeed being used inappropriately.
Another consideration that was discussed was the opportunities presented by working in multidisciplinary teams.
And then the other thing they spoke about was having a better intra-professional relationship with prescribers. So, for example, GPs. If there was a better relationship and better communication, then this problem, which could be addressed by the prescriber or by a community pharmacist or anyone really along the chain of prescribing, administrating, supplying a medicine, all of those touch points really provide an opportunity to tackle the problem. So really all those people involved in those different steps could be working better together to solve the problem.
Hamdo told me that the barriers and facilitators to deprescribing that emerged from her research weren't particularly surprising.
I suppose this piece of work, the barriers and facilitators that we uncovered aren't unusual to, if we think about other clinical services that people are exploring to bring into community pharmacy. Many of the barriers that exist with this particular problem also exist for other clinical services. So things like digital integration, pharmacists having the opportunity to view and edit patient records, better working relationships with primary care, so prescribers. So I suppose the point is that these barriers are well acknowledged. Similarly, the barrier with regards to how community pharmacy services within England are funded has been recognised for quite a while now. So I suppose this piece of work really kind of adds further evidence to considerations that are required for policy and practice quite broadly that would help quite a lot of clinical services that are being explored within community pharmacy.
We wanted to hear how Hamdo and her team plan to build on the work.
The next steps, as we've kind of recommended, I suppose, and at the end of our paper, would be to talk to the other stakeholders. I think the key group we wanted to talk to were general practitioners, the prescribers, to really get their perspectives on involving pharmacists within identifying and tackling inappropriate medication use. I think also given the growing role of the PCN pharmacists, the primary care network pharmacists, GP-based pharmacists, it'd be good to have their insights as well to kind of understand if there are different roles that could be played by these different stakeholders. And I suppose think about it as a clinical pathway, maybe, about how those different people might have different responsibilities. Yes, and think about it quite systematically in that way.
Hamdo mentioned that the main limitation to her study was getting enough participants.
We didn't happen to recruit very much, given the fact that we were trying to recruit during, I suppose, quite a high point of the COVID pandemic. So we then branched out more widely and used platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social media platforms to recruit community pharmacists nationally to speak to them. As with all qualitative studies, they're subject to a good level of recruitment. We did recruit 12 community pharmacists. However, we found that they all came from, bar one, I believe, they all came from chain pharmacies. They tend to be quite big companies. It would have been good to get a better breadth of community pharmacists, so representation from independent pharmacy and potentially smaller community groups. Also, I think we had quite a lot that were based in the northeast. So again, a wider geographical spread would have been good, maybe to capture some wider experiences.
Hamday also highlighted the importance of engaging a range of stakeholders.
The other limitation is obviously we've only really looked at the community pharmacy perspective. And if we think about tackling this as a problem, I kind of inferred that it could be tackled from various perspectives. And I think it'd be good to really speak to a wide range of stakeholders, including prescribers, commissioners, as you can imagine, if this is going to be a commissioned service, to really understand if there is potential to solve this problem in the community pharmacy, or if not, it might be a role better placed within GP practice, where again we have pharmacists working better probably because they're simply closer to doctors within that space.
Guest editor Sean reflected that this work addresses some of the challenges community pharmacy is facing as it moves from the more traditional role of dispensing to being more clinical and patient-facing.
I think it also directly responds to some of the recommendations in the National Overprescribing Review. So this review commissioned by the UK government to understand how we can tackle overprescribing, and community pharmacists clearly have a key role in that. And I think this paper, with the foundations that it provides for developing interventions, it is something that I would definitely be looking for intervention to come out of and potentially aligning with that policy as well.
He also highlighted the lack of research relating to deprescribing in community pharmacy and the importance of work like that completed by Hamday and her team to address this.
So actually, I would really like to see this paper perhaps leading in the future to kind of keep community pharmacy up with that general trend we've got in deprescribing, which is now testing these interventions. Because actually what we need to do is whilst in theory designing interventions to address these barriers is likely to be successful, what we really need is then high quality trials. And in order for the NHS to commission these services, which is obviously the model that community pharmacy operates on, we need to know that they are effective, we need to know that they're safe, and we need to know that they're cost effective. And so what we're now starting to see is far more of these trials. And as I said, a community pharmacy deprescribing trial, I think, would be something that we could be a real leader in, because actually they're on and undertaken at the moment, and I don't think there are any in the pipeline either.
That's a good stopping point for today's episode. Thank you to Sean for walking us through the current landscape of deprescribing, and to Hamday for talking us through her work. We'll leave a link to the themed collection where Hamday's paper can be found and any other relevant resources, including a previous learning episode of the PJ Pod that covered effective deprescribing, in the show notes. This Research Spotlight episode of the PJ Pod is part of the October digital issue, which can be found on our homepage, pharmaceutical-journal.com. That's it for today. Please do follow us on whatever podcast platform you use and let us know what you thought of the episode on social media using the hashtag PJPod. Until next time, goodbye.